Hi there and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Lysha and I am the owner of Lysha Be Creative, and today is going to be a tumbler tutorial, but you might be surprised to know that this will not involve glitter at all. Instead, we are going to be doing a full bling tumbler, and I am so excited to show you guys this beautiful design that I did for a tumbler swap that I am a part of. So really excited to show you guys the step-by-step process that I take when I create my rhinestone tumblers, and of course give you any tips and tricks that I can think of that I've learned throughout the process of creating bling tumblers. So of course everything I use in today's tutorial will be listed and linked down in the description box down below. You will even find discount codes to a lot of the products that I like to use in my everyday crafting, and of course links to all of my social media. Before you leave, definitely give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And while you're at it, click that notification bell so you're notified when I upload my new videos. So let's go ahead and jump right into today's tutorial.
So the first thing I wanted to show you is all of the bling that made it possible to do this tumbler. So I got all of my bling for this project from Crowned Crystals, which I will link down in the description box, as well as all the sizes that you need to recreate the design that I am making. So I am using Cool Whip, which is the white stones here, and I have those in 3mm, 2mm, 4 and 5mm. I also have some black rhinestones that I just purchased off Amazon, and that's going to help me do most of the outlining for the bees and the name. Additionally, I have also already prepped a 20-ounce tumbler. I've already sanded it and prepped it with white spray paint so that it's ready for decals and to get everything started with all this beautiful bling. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is on my tumbler, now that the paint is dry, is I'm going to be starting with the top line. The top line of your tumbler is the most important piece to start with rhinestoning. Okay, so because most of my tumbler is going to be a scatter method rhinestone tumbler, I am putting in my little rhinestone trays here 3 of the 4 sizes that I have. So I'm using the 3, 4 and 5mm stones that I'm putting in separate trays so that I can do the top line of this tumbler. So you're going to see me do this in hyper speed, but the top line is so important because you need to make sure that that top line is straight and dry before you go in with anything else on your tumbler. So I'm using my favorite glue, which is Liquid Fusion, and I just use a silicone stick to apply it. I do have those small applicator bottles, but I know that I've mentioned it in a past video that I don't particularly like to use that, only because I tend to have a hard time getting Liquid Fusion because it's such a thicker glue out of that small tip. So I have been just using kind of a silicone stick that I can easily clean off to rub my glue onto the surface that I'm going to be blinging. So I am doing a scatter method, and so it's super important that with my top line that I try and be as random with my stones and not place 2 of the same size stone next to each other for this top line so that it does give the scatter method look. You wouldn't want to go in with the same size stone for your top line because then the rest of your tumbler will look a little funny to have that top line of all the same size stones. So just kind of picking and choosing randomly, going back and forth between this different size stones to establish this top line. Once I've gotten a pretty good section done, I will flip my cup over and use my rhinestone picker to push down the stones so that they're flush against the top rim. And this is going to help me keep a super straight line on my cup and make sure that this line is literally going to be my support line, if you will, for the rest of the scatter method piece of this tumbler. So I'm going to finish this part up really quickly, and then we're going to get into applying some decals to this, which is going to help us establish all of the different designs elements for this tumbler. Okay, so now we're getting into applying the decals. So again, this was for a cup swap, and so she wanted a bee themed tumbler, and so most of these images I got from Cricut, I believe. A couple I want to say I got the bees from Creative Fabrica. So definitely make sure to check out the description box. I will have links to all of these these decals, as well as the font that I used for her name. So for the honeycombs here is I used my Cricut to weld a few of these together because it came in just a single honeycomb shape. So I just used my Cricut to weld them together. I decided not to do a Cricut portion of this tutorial just because I've done it in the past and I feel like a lot of you are familiar with it, and some of you don't even use Cricut, you use Silhouette, so I totally get that. So I wanted to at least give you a little bit of what I do when I'm using Cricut, but obviously not really spend time going into Cricut Design Space. However, if you want something like that, like a tutorial that goes through Cricut, definitely make sure that you comment on this and I will create something in the future. So I'm going to finish applying the honeycombs in kind of random spaces that I, kind of just covering up the empty space, right? Creating kind of the design that I want for this cup. I did use Cricut to kind of create what I was looking for as far as like putting that on that rectangle, which I know you guys have seen me do before, the size of the cup, to kind of just give a general layout. It always usually changes when I get to the cup, but I kind of like to do that first. That way I have an idea that everything at least is going to fit. So now I'm on to applying the bees here. So these cute little bees, I believe I got from Creative Fabrica as well. Don't forget that in the description box, I do have a link that will get you $1 all access to Creative Fabrica, which then renews after your free month at only $19. And there are so many great things at Creative Fabrica. I definitely encourage you to check that out. So now that I've gotten the bees applied, I want to create that squiggly line to kind of, mimic the bee's flight path, if you will. So I'm just using a black paint marker to be able to do this. You could print this or cut this in Cricut, but I just felt like it would be a waste, and it just made more sense to do this using a marker. So after that portion was finished, I do, which I failed to record and I apologize, I do go outside and I spray seal my entire cup with like a matte spray paint, and that is just to make sure that my vinyl is not going to do any lifting while I am doing the rhinestones. I obviously will let that fully dry before I get started on rhinestones, but I like to do that just to make sure that I don't have any issues with any lifting. I would hate to do a full cup and then have a bunch of lifting under the glue and things with my vinyl. So it's just an extra step. I don't always know that it's necessary, especially because you're really going to have an entire layer of glue around this entire cup, so it would be pretty hard to get it to be lifted, but I would rather err on the side of caution and do a spray sealing, make sure my vinyl is going to stay put so I don't have any issues when I'm going to apply my bling. So right now I am using the black rhinestones in the 2mm size to fill out all of the bees and kind of a little squiggly line for their flight path. I then go in with larger sizes and I'm going to fill in the name. When you're filling in a name, the biggest thing to make sure is that you're filling up as much of the vinyl on top as possible. Make sure though not to go on the outline of the vinyl with any of those rhinestones, because it'll create kind of like a muddled or blurry look to your vinyl, and you don't want that. That is unless you're going in and preparing to do sort of an outline around names with a different color, which I've seen and has turned out absolutely beautiful. But make sure you're kind of staying, within the lines when you're doing your bling. And I do that complete scatter method, so random stones, whatever will fit in each piece, especially when it's a more, calligraphy style name. So after I finish with all the black rhinestones, I am going to use my precision tip bottle, which killed my fingers, to be able to do the outlining in my gold stones of all of the honeycombs. So I'm using the 2mm stones for the outlining of all these honeycomb patterns, and I'm going to continue to do that for all of the honeycombs. I'm going to let this dry. I didn't want to go in and do any of the inside of the honeycomb until the first kind of layer was dry, because I didn't want my stones to move. So here, you're going to see that I'm going to now fill in all the honeycombs. So originally, I thought I would do a scatter method within the honeycombs, and I really didn't like how that looked. So I decided to do just the honeycomb method within the honeycombs to create and fill up sort of all that spaces. So I used 2mm stones for all of the honeycombs, the outlining, as well as the inside portion. But it's completely up to you what you choose to do. I think it would look beautiful in a scatter method. I just feel like for me, because I had them so small, that it just didn't work out the way I wanted it to. So now I am on to filling in the different spaces within the name. I always start with the name first before I start to go to like from top to bottom with the cup when I'm doing this style of a rhinestone tumbler. So I've just put a couple of my smaller size stones into a couple of trays so that I can start to fill in all of those little gaps in between all of the letters of the name. So take your time with this. I mean, blinging is definitely a process. Please don't ever expect that you'll get blinging done in one sitting unless you're planning on doing something small. When you're doing a tumbler, it takes time. And so I've actually been working on this cup over the course of several weeks. Normally with a bling item, I like to take no longer than a week, but because I was given the opportunity within this tumbler swap to be able to do this over the course of like 4 to 5 weeks, it just made sense for me to take my time with it and not kind of rush the process. So it was a lot of starting and stopping, but all in all, probably hands-on time was probably closer to 7, maybe 8 hours. If I'm guesstimating, I think like a regular tumbler, like a 20 ounce, and I'm just doing honeycomb method, probably takes me 4 to 6 hours of hands-on time. That's while jamming to music, of course. But with a scatter method, I feel like it takes a little bit longer because you're kind of playing the game of Tetris, which is literally my favorite game ever to play. And you're just kind of, placing stones where they fit. Based on the different size stones that you have. So I hope that makes sense. Scatter method is just, I find it's easier because I don't have to really pay attention to where a stone is going. I just have to make sure it's pushed up against another stone, if that makes sense, right? Whereas honeycomb, like you have to make sure that you don't mess up your lines, that your line stays straight, that you don't get any craziness where like one of the stones lifts, which then throws off your whole line. It's a little bit more than it needs to be, right? So I'm going to finish off the name here. I'm kind of just building as I go, right? Filling in all those little small gaps and then moving towards the larger section. So it'll have a nice section right here in the middle around her name that will be completely done in rhinestones before I, take a break from this and move on and wait for another day to get started on this. So I'm going to speed up this and we're going to get into the next part so I can really talk about how I get into the scatter method as far as blinging the rest of the tumbler, sort of the background of this tumbler. So this is about how far I got before I kind of stopped. I did fill in all the bees as well, which you didn't see in the hyper speed or the time-lapse video there. So I did the inner portion of the bees, kind of the little holes that the squiggly line makes, and then around her name before I kind of stopped. So now we're on to bling the rest of the cup. So you'll notice that I have a good portion done. So I had kind of been working on this a little bit at a time, and so I didn't want to bore you with a hour-long time-lapse video because that would be painful to watch. So I'm just showing you snippets of the process, but obviously if you have any questions and comments, leave those down below. So now that I'm working on kind of the rest of the tumbler to kind of get this started, this was the longest time. So I spent about 4 hours here finishing off the rest of this cup, okay? So I'm creating my mix. So I'm taking all of the different sizes of that Cool Whip color. I'm taking a little bit of them and just sprinkling them into this little container. And mixing them all up before I put them in my large rhinestone tray to start blinging away. So instead of doing single trays, because I knew this was kind of the home stretch, I'm just mixing it all together so it just makes it easier to pick up the different stone sizes and kind of get going, if you will, with finishing up this cup. So again, going in with my liquid fusion, I'm right now using Post-it notes to kind of hold my glue, but I did purchase, which didn't come in time, these cute little silicone mats that I saw Nikki's Knacks on Instagram. She had them and I was like, oh my God, that's so smart. Like I need to get those for when I'm doing bling because it would make it so much easier, right? So they're so cute. They're like little fruit shaped slices. It's like a silicone mat that you can use for your glue and it peels right off. So just like my silicone stick that I'm using, literally peels right off after everything is dry. And so it just makes it much better, obviously, than wasting a bunch of Post-it notes like I have been doing. So here's just an up close of how I place my stones. Obviously, this is a little bit sped up, but I am just taking the different random size stones just as I pick them up and I'm just finding a place for them. So literally the game of Tetris, that is what you're doing with the entire cup, okay? So you want these to be as close to each other as possible without causing the stone next to it to buckle. So you want these kind of tight knit, but also expect that you're going to have some gaps and things that you're not ever going to be able to fill. So I had really tiny stones, which I think were the 2 millimeter, possibly, maybe smaller than that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but everything will be linked down in the description. But the smallest stones that I had, sometimes I would use those to fill up those smaller gaps, but even sometimes those didn't fit. And because I didn't have anything smaller than that, you just kind of leave that space be, right? And so it's so small that when you're looking at the tumbler and holding it, you're not going to be able to tell unless you're really up close and personal in this tumbler's face, if you will, to be able to see those tiny gaps. But please don't ever feel like you're doing it wrong when you have those small gaps. That is completely normal. But obviously the idea here is to try and cover up as much of that tumbler as possible with all your different scattered sizes of stones. So now we're getting into the kind of final time lapse of this process. So I'm really close to the bottom at this point, after I had kind of done the kind of long period of time of just blinging and filling up this cup here. And so now that I'm towards the bottom, I'm now going to be working on the bottom line. So very much like my top line, my bottom line is also just as important, okay? So I'm going to go in with my glue here, my liquid fusion, and just put a little bit of glue on that bottom edge there. And I am going to, again, go around with all those different size stones. The only stones that I didn't use were the super, super small ones because they were too small. It just didn't make sense. Those are kind of my filler stones, if you will, for those teeny tiny spaces. And so I didn't put those in the lineup, but I did use my 3, 4, and 5 millimeter stones to fill up this bottom row, just like I did with the top row. So I'm going to go around the entire bottom edge of this, and very similarly as I did with the top, I'm going to flip it down and make sure that all my stones are as straight as possible. I want to make sure that I have a nice straight line and that it doesn't look wonky, because that will look very obvious, obviously, if you have a crooked line on the bottom. So making sure that you're pushing the stones and evening them out so it's one nice straight line. Using your table to kind of help you do that is going to be important. So once I get through this line, just like I did with the top line, I'm going to give it a little bit of time to really dry and the glue to adhere. Super important because, again, I don't want to go in with my other stones to fill up the little bit of space that I have left, because that is then going to push those stones, if they're still wet, out of alignment, which is going to give you that kind of wavy bottom line, which I definitely do not want for this. So I'm going to take my time with this, and after I'm done with that line, again, I'm going to leave it to dry before I go in and fill up the little bit that is left to finish off this tumbler. So once I am done with that and it is dried, I then will get into finishing off the rest of this cup. Obviously, there wasn't much space left, so literally it took me maybe a matter of 20 minutes to fill in the rest of that space there. Not very long at all to get the rest of that filled in before this tumbler was completely done. So my stones are now all in place. This entire cup is filled with rhinestones, and you guys know me, I have to be a little bit extra. So we're going to add these cute little bees that I've gotten from Amazon. So I've actually had these bees for almost 2 years now. I've been meaning to make a bee cup for literally 2 years, and I'm only now just getting around to it. So in order to adhere these bees, I'm going to be using UV resin. So I just made like a little T shape that kind of was the size of the bee to adhere these, and then I cured under my UV lamp for 60 seconds. That was more than enough time to cure the UV resin, and I am happy to say that I didn't have any of like that tackiness that sometimes you can get when using UV resin. This is a newer one that I picked up from Amazon, so thank goodness everything worked out. But I definitely think that when it comes to UV resin, it's all about your lamp. So I, of course, will have all my supplies linked in the description box, but I applied just about 4 of these little bee rhinestones to my tumbler, just on the honeycomb section, because I knew that those stones were fully cured already. And so once that was it, yeah, that was kind of done. And so here is the final look at the cup. So this cup is not 100% finished. It still needs to dry for a few more hours. You want to make sure your stones dry for a full 24 hours or whatever is recommended by your glue before you give that a beautiful rhinestone bling bath, taking it inside and washing it with soap and water and a scrub brush to rub off any of the wax that may be still on your stones. So I'm so happy with how this turned out. I hope that you enjoyed today's tutorial. And of course, if you did, give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys again soon.